The clock on the kitchen wall showed 9:47 p.m. when David finally walked through the front door. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his shirt was wrinkled from another long day at the office. Elena looked up from her laptop where she had been paying bills, the same routine they had fallen into for months now. "Dinner's in the fridge," she said without looking at him directly. Maya already ate and finished her homework. David nodded and headed straight to the refrigerator. This was their life now. Brief updates about their 15-year-old daughter, discussions about schedules, and not much else. He heated up the leftover pasta while Elena continued typing on her computer. The silence between them wasn't angry anymore. It was something worse. It was empty. Elena remembered when David used to tell her about his day, when they would sit together after dinner and actually talk. Now he ate standing up at the counter, scrolling through his phone while she finished her work. They had become two people who happened to live in the same house, sharing responsibilities but not sharing their lives. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during a particularly difficult morning. Maya had forgotten her science project at home. David was running late for an important meeting, and Elena had already taken time off work twice that month for family emergencies. As they stood in the kitchen, all three of them stressed and rushing, Elena felt something crack inside her chest. "We need help," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the morning chaos. David stopped mid-bite of his toast and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Us, we need help with us." Elena's hands were shaking slightly as she pointed between them. "Look at us, David. When was the last time we actually talked to each other?" "Really talked?" Maya glanced between her parents, sensing the tension in the room. She grabbed her backpack quickly. "I'll walk to school today," she mumbled, practically running toward the door. After Maya left, the kitchen felt even quieter. David set down his coffee cup and really looked at his wife for what felt like the first time in months. Elena's eyes were tired, and there were lines around them he hadn't noticed before. When had she started looking so sad? "I don't know how to fix this," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't even know when it got so bad." David wanted to say something, to reach across the space between them, but the words wouldn't come. They had been married for 15 years, together for 17, but somehow they had become strangers. He went to work that morning feeling like something important had just slipped through his fingers. That evening, Elena made the call. She found a marriage counselor online and scheduled an appointment for the following week. When David came home, she told him about it over dinner. Counseling. David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Do you really think we need that?" "David, we barely speak to each other anymore. Our daughter eats dinner alone most nights because you're at work, and I'm too tired to cook until after she's already eaten. We sleep on opposite sides of the bed like there's a wall between us. Yes, I think we need help." The first counseling session was awkward and uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s, asked them basic questions about their relationship that they struggled to answer. When was the last time they went on a date? They couldn't remember. When was the last time they had a conversation that wasn't about logistics? Neither could say. "What brought you two together originally?" Dr. Martinez asked. Elena and David looked at each other across the small office. For a moment, Elena saw a flicker of the man she had fallen in love with. The one who used to make her laugh until her sides hurt. Who would drive across town just to bring her soup when she was sick. "We used to have fun together," Elena said softly. "We used to be friends," David nodded slowly. "We used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. Elena was the first person I wanted to tell when something good happened, or when something went wrong. And now," Dr. Martinez prompted gently. The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Martinez gave them homework. Spend 15 minutes each day talking to each other without phones, computers, or television. No discussing schedules or Maya's school activities. Just talk. The first few attempts were painfully awkward. They sat on their couch looking anywhere but at each other, struggling to find words. David talked about a funny conversation with a coworker. Elena mentioned a book she was reading. The conversations felt forced and unnatural, but they were talking. By the third week, something small began to shift. Elena mentioned that she had been thinking about taking an art class, something she hadn't talked about in years. David told her about a promotion opportunity that excited him but also scared him. They were still careful with each other, like people learning to trust again after being hurt. But the real problem ran deeper than their communication. They had stopped seeing each other as people with dreams and fears and hopes. Elena had become Maya's mom, and the one who handles the house stuff in David's mind. To Elena, David had become the provider and the one who's always tired from work. During their fourth counseling session, Dr. Martinez asked them a question that hit like a punch to the chest. Do you two still love each other? Elena felt tears spring to her eyes immediately. Of course she loved David. But loving someone and being in love with them were two different things, weren't they? She loved him like family, like someone she cared about deeply but no longer felt connected to. The passion, the excitement, the sense of partnership, all of that felt like it belonged to different people from a different time. David was quiet for a long moment. I love the person Elena was, he finally said, and I think she loves who I used to be. But I don't know if we love who we are now. The truth of his words hung in the air between them. They had both changed over the years, shaped by stress and responsibility and the simple passage of time. Elena wasn't the carefree woman who used to dance in the kitchen while cooking. David wasn't the attentive partner who used to surprise her with small gestures of affection. That night they drove home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they got ready for bed, Elena found herself studying David's reflection in the bathroom mirror. He was still handsome, still the man she had chosen to build a life with. But when was the last time she had really looked at him? When was the last time he had really looked at her? They needed more than conversation exercises and counseling sessions. They needed to find their way back to each other as people, not just as co-parents and household managers. Elena fell asleep that night wondering if it was even possible to rebuild something that had been slowly crumbling for years. The answer to that question would come in ways she never expected, requiring a kind of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. 3 days after their most honest conversation in months, Elena woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. It was a Saturday morning, and for once David wasn't rushing off to the office. Maya was spending the weekend at her best friend's house, which meant the house felt unusually quiet and empty. Elena made coffee and sat by the kitchen window, watching the neighbors walk their dogs and tend to their gardens. She thought about what Dr. Martinez had said during their last session. Sometimes we need to take risks to save what matters most to us. At the time, those words had seemed like typical counselor advice. But now, sitting in the morning sunlight, they felt like a challenge. David came downstairs an hour later, his hair messy from sleep, wearing an old college t-shirt she hadn't seen in years. For a moment, he looked like the young man she had fallen in love with. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "What are your plans today?" he asked, a simple question that would have been routine in their old life together. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. "I was thinking about us," she said honestly. "About what we talked about the other day." David nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it too, about how we used to be." They spent the morning talking more openly than they had in months. Elena told him about the loneliness she felt, even when he was sitting right next to her. David admitted that he had been using work as an escape because being home felt so tense and complicated. They both acknowledged that they had stopped trying to connect physically and emotionally sometime over the past year. "I miss touching you," Elena said quietly, surprised by her own boldness. Not just in bed, but holding hands, hugging, all of it. "We used to be affectionate people." David's face softened. "I miss that too. I didn't know how to get back to that. Everything felt so awkward between us." As the day went on, Elena found herself thinking about their early relationship. She remembered how natural intimacy used to feel between them. They would reach for each other without thinking, comfort each other with touch, communicate through small gestures of affection. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped touching entirely except for the occasional awkward pat on the shoulder or brief hug goodbye. That afternoon, while David was outside fixing a loose fence post, Elena made a decision that scared and excited her at the same time. She realized that all their talking and counseling sessions were important, but they needed something more. They needed to rediscover their physical connection, the intimacy that had once made them feel like partners instead of just roommates. She spent the afternoon preparing, not just practically, but emotionally. She took a long bath, something she rarely did anymore. She put on clothes that made her feel attractive rather than just comfortable. She thought about the woman she used to be before she became so focused on being a mother and managing a household that she forgot she was also a wife. Elena had always been the more cautious one in their relationship. David had been the one to suggest moving in together, to propose, to push for the next steps. But now she felt like she needed to be the one to take the risk, to make the gesture that might bring them back together. As evening approached, she felt nervous in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It reminded her of their early dating days, when every interaction carried weight and possibility. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong. David might not understand, might feel pressured, might be too tired or distracted to respond the way she hoped. But she also thought about what would happen if she didn't try. They could continue going to counseling, having careful conversations, making small improvements to their daily interactions. But would that be enough to bridge the gap between them? Would that bring back the passion and connection they had lost? Elena decided to prepare their bedroom in a way that felt special, but not overwhelming. She lit a few candles, straightened up the clothes that had been draped over the chair for weeks, and opened the curtains to let in the soft evening light. She wanted to create an atmosphere that invited intimacy without demanding it. The hardest part was deciding what to wear, or whether to wear anything at all. She stood in front of their closet for a long time, thinking about how to communicate what she wanted without putting too much pressure on the moment. Finally, she chose something simple but pretty, something that made her feel attractive but not like she was trying too hard. When she heard David's footsteps on the stairs, her heart started beating faster. She had positioned herself by their bedroom window, looking out at the garden they had planted together 3 years ago. The flowers were blooming beautifully, a reminder of what they could create together when they worked as a team. Elena heard David stop at the bedroom doorway. She didn't turn around immediately, giving him time to notice the changes in the room, to understand that this wasn't just another ordinary evening. When she finally faced him, she saw surprise and confusion in his eyes, but also something else, a flicker of the interest and attraction that had been dormant for so long. "Elena?" His voice was uncertain, questioning. She walked toward him slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Martinez said, about taking risks for what matters to us." She paused, searching for the right words. "I want to try something different tonight. I want us to remember what it feels like to really be together." David set down the book he had been carrying and looked at her more carefully. Elena could see him trying to process what was happening, trying to understand if this was about physical intimacy or something deeper. She hoped he could see that it was both. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that we've forgotten how to be close to each other. But I'm more scared of continuing to live like strangers." The vulnerability in her voice seemed to reach something inside David. His expression softened, and he took a step closer to her. For the first time in months, the space between them felt charged with possibility instead of tension. Elena realized that this moment was about more than just physical connection. She was offering him her trust, her willingness to be vulnerable, her hope that they could find their way back to each other. She was taking off not just her clothes, but all the protective barriers she had built around her heart over the months of growing distance between them. As she stood there, waiting for his response, Elena felt more like herself than she had in a very long time. The space between them on the bed felt both vast and intimate. David sat beside Elena, close enough that she could feel the warmth from his body, but they weren't quite touching yet. The candles flickered softly in the evening breeze coming through the slightly open window, and the familiar sounds of their neighborhood seemed distant and unimportant. Elena's heart was still beating fast, but not from nervousness anymore. It was excitement mixed with something deeper. Relief that David had understood what she was trying to communicate, that he had chosen to meet her in this vulnerable space rather than pulling away or making excuses. "I feel like I don't know how to do this anymore," David admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We used to be so natural together, and now I'm second-guessing everything." Elena turned to face him more fully, studying his profile in the soft light. She could see the uncertainty in his expression, but also the genuine desire to reconnect. "We don't have to know how," she said gently. "We can figure it out together. We can learn each other again." David looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Not seen as the woman who organized their schedules or made sure Maya had clean clothes for school, but seen as Elena, the person he had chosen to love, the woman he had promised to grow old with. "You cut your hair," he said suddenly, reaching up to touch the shorter style she had been wearing for 2 months. "It looks beautiful." "I'm sorry I didn't notice before." Elena smiled, leaning into his touch. "I was wondering if you'd ever notice. I almost asked you directly a few times, but then I got busy with other things and forgot." "I want to notice everything about you again," David said, his fingers still gentle in her hair. "I want to pay attention to you the way I used to, the way you deserve." They talked quietly as the evening light faded outside their window. Not about schedules or responsibilities or Maya's upcoming school events, but about themselves. Elena told David about the book she had been reading, a mystery novel that reminded her of the stories they used to read together when they were first married. David shared a funny story from work that he had been saving up to tell someone, realizing he had been waiting to tell her but hadn't found the right moment. As they talked, they gradually moved closer together. First, Elena's hand rested on David's knee, then his arm came around her shoulders. Small touches that felt significant after months of careful distance. Each contact was a question, "Is this okay?" And an answer, "Yes, this is what I want too." "I've been sleeping on my side of the bed like there's an invisible wall down the middle," Elena confessed, laughing softly at herself. "Even when you're not home, I stay on my side." "Isn't that silly?" David chuckled, the first real laugh Elena had heard from him in weeks. "I've been doing the same thing. And I always wait for you to turn off your light first because I don't want to seem like I'm ignoring you. But I also don't want to assume you want to talk." We've been so polite with each other, Elena realized, like roommates who are trying not to bother each other instead of like people who love each other. "I want to bother you again," David said, his voice warm with affection. "I want to tell you about my day and ask about yours. I want to complain about work and have you tell me when I'm being ridiculous. I want to argue about what to watch on TV and fall asleep holding you." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I want all of that too. I want to feel like we're partners again instead of just people managing a life together." As they continued talking, the physical distance between them gradually disappeared. David's hand found Elena's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. Elena tucked herself closer to his side, remembering how perfectly she fit against him, how safe she had always felt in his arms. "I've missed this," David murmured against her hair. "Just holding you. Just being close without having to have a reason or make it about something else." Elena closed her eyes, focusing on the feeling of being held by someone who loved her. When was the last time they had just cuddled without it leading somewhere specific or being interrupted by responsibilities? She couldn't remember, but she promised herself she wouldn't let them go so long without this simple intimacy again. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other and talking quietly. Elena told David about her thoughts of taking an art class, something she had been considering but hadn't mentioned because it seemed frivolous compared to their practical concerns. David shared his worries about the promotion opportunity at work, not just the professional challenges, but his fear that more responsibility would pull him even further away from his family. "I don't want to choose between being successful at work and being present at home," he admitted, "but lately it feels like I can't do both well." "Maybe we can figure out a way to make both work," Elena suggested. "Maybe if we're more intentional about our time together, quality will matter more than quantity." As they talked through their individual concerns and dreams, Elena felt like she was rediscovering the man she had married. David had always been thoughtful and ambitious, but somewhere along the way she had started seeing only his stress and distraction, instead of the dreams and fears that drove them. "I love listening to you think through problems," Elena said, tracing patterns on David's chest with her finger. "You always consider all the angles. I used to tell you everything because I knew you'd help me see things differently." "I love that about us too," David replied. "We were always good at figuring things out together. I don't know why we stopped doing that." As the night grew later, they found themselves lying together properly for the first time in months, Elena's head on David's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The position felt natural and right, like their bodies remembered how to fit together even when their hearts had been struggling to reconnect. "This doesn't fix everything," Elena said softly, acknowledging the reality that one evening couldn't undo months of distance and miscommunication. I know, David agreed, but it's a start. It's proof that we're still in there somewhere, that the people who fell in love 17 years ago are still here. Elena smiled in the darkness. I feel more like myself tonight than I have in a long time. Not just Maya's mom or the person who handles the grocery shopping, but me, Elena, your wife. I feel like your husband again, too, David said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Not just the guy who pays the mortgage and worries about work, but the person who chose you and wants to keep choosing you every day. They fell asleep that night truly together, not just sharing the same bed but sharing the same hope for their future.